You are still at your desk at 6:40, running one more check on a deliverable nobody asked you to verify. 2 desks over, someone who answered 3 messages all day is already zipping their bag, coat half on before the elevator dings. Their inbox has 11 items marked later. Yours has none, because you never let anything sit long enough to be marked. 11 months from now, that person gets promoted before you do, not despite doing less. Because of it. Office politics didn't announce itself with a memo. It announced itself with a promotion that landed on the wrong desk. The organization did not make a mistake, it made a choice. And by its own private math, it made that choice correctly. Assume for a second this only happens at companies too small to notice, or on teams too disorganized to measure real output. It's the opposite. The larger and more structured the company, the more precisely this gets rewarded, because size is what turns one person's private judgment into a repeatable formula. This isn't a personality flaw playing out in your office. It's office politics, running exactly as designed. A resource allocation system that was never built to measure effort. It measures friction. Whoever costs the system the least friction wins the system's resources, regardless of what they actually produce. Nobody sat in a room and voted for this. Nobody had to. The system arrived at it on its own, the way water finds the lowest point in a floor without anyone drawing the map. Several mechanisms explain how that arrival actually works, and by the last of them, the deliverable still sitting open on your screen at 6:40 will look less like dedication and more like a transaction you never agreed to. You believe that absorbing more work is what proves your value? That the manager doing the assigning is quietly building a case for your advancement every time you say yes. They aren't building anything for you. Watch what happens the next time a task with no clear owner surfaces in a meeting. The manager's eyes move across the room and land almost instantly on whoever answered the last 3 requests, without negotiating the deadline. It happens in under 2 seconds. Faster than any real evaluation of who has capacity or who has earned a break. That speed is the tell. Nobody consciously ranked the room before landing on you. The nervous system already did it weeks ago and just executed the lookup. That is not a reward, that is a routing decision made by a nervous system trained to minimize resistance, not to maximize fairness. The queue is a gap, a task nobody owns yet. The routine is automatic. Hand it to whoever absorbs friction quietest. The reward the manager collects isn't your growth, it's an afternoon without a difficult conversation. You experience this as being trusted. The manager experiences it as a problem solved cheaply. 2 different transactions happening in the same 5 seconds, and only one person in the room knows both prices. Here's the part nobody warns you about. This routing decision doesn't just skip the underperformer, it builds their alibi. Every task that lands on you instead of them is one less piece of evidence that they can't be trusted with responsibility, because responsibility in this system was never actually offered to them to begin with. You believe your manager simply hasn't noticed the gap in output between you and the person coasting, that if it were visible, someone would act on it. They've noticed. That's exactly the problem. Firing someone costs a currency that never shows up on a budget line. Political capital. It requires a documented conversation, a probation window, a replacement search, a training runway for whoever comes next, and a manager willing to admit, on the record, that a hiring decision was wrong. That admission travels upward to whoever approved the original hire. Quietly rerouting that person's unfinished work to you costs the manager nothing and leaves that admission permanently unmade. The queue repeats. An underperformer's task starts slipping. The routine, this time, arrives as a message sent after hours. Hey, when you get a chance, could you just look this over? That phrasing isn't casual. A manager confident you'll say no asks directly. A manager who already knows you won't push back downgrades the request until refusing it feels petty instead of reasonable. The reward is a stable-looking team purchased with your unpaid overtime instead of a conversation the manager doesn't want to have. What makes it worse is what office politics does to the underperformer's file. Every quarter they survive without consequence becomes evidence, cited later, that they must be fine. Continuity gets mistaken for competence, and the system files it exactly that way. You believe good output is self-evident, that results eventually speak loud enough to promote themselves without your help. They don't. They never did. Promotion decisions get made in a room you're not in, usually called a calibration meeting, where a group of people who don't do your job, working from a spreadsheet that reduces a year of your work to a single cell, try to remember your name fast enough to defend it. Auditory processing and active listening, that's the narrow thing I've spent years on. How people speak, hesitate, and respond under pressure. One pattern shows up in these rooms every time. The person who gets defended isn't the one with the strongest numbers on paper. It's the one whose name has already been said out loud the most, in casual, low-stakes conversations that had nothing to do with a review cycle. Repetition manufactures familiarity, and familiarity gets mistaken for trust. Listen for the pause before someone vouches for a colleague in that meeting. A confident pause is short because the name is already loaded. A long pause before I think they're solid isn't thoughtfulness. It's someone searching a nearly empty file. That half-second gap is the entire distance between a promotion and a maybe next cycle. You did the work. The other person did the talking. In that room, only one of those two activities is on the agenda. Now here's the part that feels unfair. The same imbalance is what quietly decides who gets protected the next time headcount gets cut. You believe becoming indispensable is what finally makes you safe. That being the only person who can do something is a form of protection. It's a form of custody. Once you're the sole person who understands a system, moving you anywhere becomes expensive for the exact people who would otherwise promote you. Not expensive to the company in some abstract, long-term sense. Expensive to your manager, this quarter, in a way that shows up on a dashboard they get evaluated on. The cue is a promotion conversation opening up. The routine, from your manager, arrives as warmth instead of resistance. We can't afford to lose you from this. Delivered like a compliment. The reward is a department that keeps functioning without the cost of retraining anyone. Meanwhile, the person 2 desks away, the one with no critical function tied to their name, is the cheapest person in the building to move. Nobody depends on their continuity, so nobody has to negotiate anything to promote them sideways, upward, or simply out of a shrinking team. On a succession document neither of you will ever see. Both of your names carry a note. Yours reads, "Critical, retain in current role." Theirs reads, "Ready now." Office politics just filed 2 careers into 2 different futures, and neither person in the room saw it happen. And here's the part that doesn't show up until years later. Indispensable people rarely get pushed out. They get kept exactly where they are, for exactly long enough that the market stops recognizing what they were worth. You believe staying calm under pressure is a personality trait, something people either have or don't. It's a performance, and the underperformer has rehearsed it longer than you have. Watch what happens the next time a deadline gets missed in front of other people. In a status meeting, not in a private message where nobody else can read the room. You, having actually cared about the outcome, show some visible strain. A faster speech pattern, a harder edge in your voice, the physical signature of someone who takes the failure personally. The person who caused it, having invested nothing emotionally in the result, answers with a flat, unbothered tone and a shrug dressed up as a sentence. These things happen. In the room, that flatness reads as composure. Your visible strain reads as fragility. There's real research behind why flat wins that room. Shlomo Hareli, A professor of social psychology at the University of Haifa has spent years studying exactly this: how the emotion someone shows while explaining a workplace failure changes whether that explanation gets believed, and whether the person explaining it looks promotable or gets managed out. Calm reads as credible. Visible distress reads as a liability, even in the person who tried hardest to prevent the failure in the first place. Nobody in that meeting is actually measuring who caused the delay. They're reading tone, and tone lies more efficiently than facts do, because facts require someone to go check the timeline, and tone is available instantly for free to anyone in the room with functioning ears. The cue is failure becoming visible. The routine that gets rewarded isn't competence. It's a convincing performance of unbotheredness. The reward is a reputation for being steady under pressure, handed to the person who felt the least responsible for the outcome in the first place. That's not even the part that costs you the most. The part that costs you the most is what happens to your own voice after enough of these rooms. You start rehearsing the flatness too, and somewhere along the way forget it was ever a performance instead of who you are. None of this reverses by working harder inside the same routine. The cue stays the cue. The reward the system hands out stays the reward. The only thing that ever moves is the routine sitting between them, and that's the only lever that was ever available. This isn't workplace psychology in the abstract. It's the specific lever that changes who gets remembered and who gets forgotten. And it works because the system was never designed to distinguish between someone who matters and someone whose name was simply repeated enough times. People who stop disappearing tend to use something close to what could be called the naming line. One factual sentence, in writing, sent at the exact moment a piece of finished work would otherwise be absorbed silently into the system, addressed not to the manager who assigned it, but to whoever actually sits in the room where names get repeated. It isn't a report or a case being built, and it never goes to the whole team, which would read as a complaint instead of a record. One sentence: what was done, when, and by whom, stated as fact without commentary. The cue doesn't change. The work still gets finished quietly. The reward doesn't change either. The manager still gets a stable, low-friction team. What changes is that a name now exists in writing, in the exact channel that feeds the room you're never in, instead of existing only in someone's memory of having done the work. Picture the next Friday afternoon a deliverable closes out with nobody watching. The old habit is to shut the laptop and say nothing. The new routine is one sentence sent before the tab closes. Picture the calibration meeting 3 months after that. The pause before your name, shorter than it used to be, because there's finally something on record for the room to remember. That's how people actually get promoted at work. Not by being the best at the job, but by being the name the room already knows. You were never being measured for effort. You were being measured for the risk of removing you, and it turns out those are two different scores. 11 months from now, someone gets promoted again for costing the system the least. The building won't start rewarding effort just because the mechanism now has a name. What changes is whether your name exists anywhere in the room deciding who gets remembered, or only in your own memory of the nights you stayed until 6:40, in an office that was never keeping that particular record for you. If this just described your actual week, name the moment in the comments in your own words. Nobody there is grading it. It just stops living only in your memory.